Welcome to the Lubbock or Leave It podcast, a recruiting specific podcast on RedRaidersports.com. I'm Matt Clare. This has been Golan. Before we jump into things, as always, we want to thank our title sponsor, Carnley Properties. Clayton Carnley is a longtime poster on the site. His team is in the greater Austin area. Any real estate needs that you guys have, please give them a call. Every time I talk to somebody, I recently moved this last year. I've got, folks looking at buying plots of land out in East Texas, things like that. I mean, they do everything you can imagine. And, with prices booming and opportunities all around, you need somebody knowledgeable in that area. So give them a holler. We're going to post all their information here. And again, we appreciate Carnley Properties for sponsoring the pod. Ben, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Matt. Yeah, it's good to be back with fall camp starting in 2 days, and we're going to get into all that. But yeah, man, it's good.
Usually around this time of year, we are the fanatics, right? We are, Uber fans that focus on the whole process here. And there's a lot of those around college football. But man, like we're usually excited this time of year, but what we're going to talk about today is really galvanize that. And we're talking conference realignment, but just to set that table, Ben, from a college football standpoint, I don't know how long you've been watching it, how long you've been following it. You just had a birthday. You're a big grown up now, right? So several years, I would assume. But man, I think over the past couple of years, when you really look at, conference realignment, when you look at now the transfer portal and you look at name, image, likeness being as brand new as it is, I don't think, again, I'm 38 years old. I don't think in my lifetime I've seen this much change in college football really across the board. And so it's just kind of wild. We're going to get into the realignment stuff in some detail, but I don't know, just your thoughts, thinking about all that change in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, it is a lot. It feels like every few months there's another rule or another something that's just throwing the whole world upside down. And I think I'm in agreement with most people where I like the traditional rivalries. Like obviously like screw UT, but it's fun when you play them. It's fun to beat them, and just my overall thoughts on that is once they're gone, I'm gonna miss having that rivalry, and we'll see what happens with the Red Raiders.
Yeah, that's kind of been a long-standing thing, like who is Tech's rival. But when you kind of look at the history of Texas Tech football, certainly UT and others like A&M have been a big part of that history. So yeah, I mean, the old Big 12 with two different divisions, all the teams in Texas, that had been long gone in 2010, 2011. That was the first round of realignment. And, now we look up and we're almost to the tail end of 2021 and of course, starting the season. So going into 2022, 2023, the biggest news is that OU and UT are leaving the Big 12. When that happens, that's not for us to talk about, but, all reports indicate it happening sometime soon. What happens with the remaining 8 teams in the Big 12 is it's fascinating in our industry, Ben. I mean, I think you and I, and this is not me going on a soapbox, but you and I bust our hump for recruiting updates. And if you post anything about realignment, it gets thousands of views, within a 4-hour span. So people love this stuff. I think it's fascinating, but I think it also maybe scares some of the folks in terms of, what Texas Tech's future could be. I guess that's a pretty broad opening there, but your thoughts so far on maybe what happens next. I know a lot of people talk about the Pac-12, Ben, and we try to follow every rumor, but I don't know. Have you stopped to really kind of collect your thoughts on what's happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think all the options are still on the table. I think the most important part for Tech would be to somehow stay in a power conference. I think that's pretty obvious. Just one of my most recent interviews, I talked to a kid who said, I'm reading his quote right here. He said, "I'll be really disappointed if the Big 12 is demolished, in the sense that if Tech was sent to the American Conference, if Tech went to the Pac-12, nothing changes for me." So that just tells you right there what some of these guys are thinking. If Tech was in a group of 5 conference, what separates them from like a Tulsa or an SMU or a Houston? I mean, you'd be right on the same level as them as far as conference, affiliation, all that. So I know I have been. You look at my Twitter, I've been posting different Pac-12 memes, every other day, and trying to speak that into existence. So, I mean, I just, I don't know what's going to happen, but, I personally hope that Tech ends up, in a Power Five, whether it's the Pac-12 or, the ACC over there with Miami and Clemson and all those guys.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is why it's so fascinating. I mean, I could look back at this recording in 4 to 5 years and be absolutely right or 100% wrong. But I feel pretty strongly in saying that in this conversation, we as a collective group here have to kind of go into it without. I mean, 2010 and realignment and what mattered then, and where college football is now, and I mean, think about just the technology you had in 2010. Think about the ability to stream or do any of that didn't exist, and so we almost have to kind of again, because I only say that because you said going to the American Conference with the SMUs and the Tulsas. I mean, I truly don't think that's one of the options on the table. I think what would be on the table is you take what's remaining, what's left. Let's say West Virginia stays on the East Coast and goes to a different conference. Let's say any of these rumors about Kansas are true, or Iowa State, or whatever is out there, right? You take the best of what's left, the Techs, the Baylors, the TCUs, the whoever's of the Big 12, Oklahoma State, obviously, that itself could be a conference combined with some of those other teams, right? Because you need 10, 12 teams. Obviously, you'd like to have more, as we talk about further into the future, with the SEC now at 16 teams, Big 10 at 14, Pac-12 at 12, right? So, I mean, to me, overall, I think that itself could be a strong option. Now, you're not going to get the same dollars, and that's pretty much the reason nobody likes that route. But in the Pac-12, we don't know what that looks like. Apparently, Bowlesby and the new Pac commissioner met this week, spent 6 hours together, et cetera, et cetera. I read about the new Pac-12 commissioner. He was one of the first CEOs or acting CEOs at Hulu. So it sounds like he understands that world. He also came from MGM Grand. So every time you look up, to me anyway, whether it's Instagram or Twitter, there's a new person that is, it's all about bets and all that. And as that becomes more legal, I just don't know if conferences or any of this matters, Ben. And I know you want there's like academics, there's this, there's that, the other. If Tech had maybe like this endless supply of money, it almost seems like you could go into business for yourself. It almost seems like you could, if possible, just be independent and, be a schedule, fill that schedule with all these folks because they all need these games, and then stream or have partnerships or do whatever you need to do. I mean, I don't have the answers, but kind of tying all of this back to recruiting, forgetting all of that, because like we said before we press record, it can go in a number of directions. Let's start with Pac-12, right? Tech goes to Pac-12 with Oklahoma State. That is the boardwalk on Monopoly. That's the prime property. That's the option everyone wants. Ben, you're the only school in Texas in the Pac-12. You're the gateway to the West. How does that affect Texas Tech as a program when it comes to what you and I focus on most, college football recruiting?
Yeah, if Tech went to the Pac-12, are they going to go to California and sign, 15 California prospects? Probably not. Could it help them, maybe get in the door with 1 or 2? I think it could. And especially, I just think this is interesting. Who's going to be the starting quarterback, and where is he from? And he was a Rivals, top 120 recruit. He's a household name from Arizona. I just, Tyler Shuck has a huge year and then Tech goes to the Pac-12. I'm thinking of those possibilities. Colin Schooler played in that conference. He's a senior, but, they do have ties there. But I still think, the majority of your recruits would obviously come from Texas. It would be, you mentioned the only Texas school in the Pac-12, which I think would give you something unique and something to sell, especially if, Baylor and TCU don't end up in a Power Five. Then that's another advantage. You'd kind of be third, in the pecking order there behind Texas and A&M. I think it would be a big deal for the Red Raiders in recruiting if they were able to get to the Pac-12.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why I said gateway to the West. I think it just gives you something to sell, because all the, you're always, I think if you look, then maybe this just me, 'cause I'm a recruiting nerd, but if you look at offer lists, you follow recruiting on a year-to-year basis, regardless of the coaching staff, there's just some no-brainer offers that you're going to make, right? You're going to offer the top quarterback. You're going to offer the top running back. You're going to do that pretty early, unless you have a reason why, they're not considering you or they're already committed or whatever. And so, I think a large portion of those offers, can be looked at as, well, they got to do it. You got to shoot your shot. And I'm a big proponent of that. But where I'm getting at is as you sort of look at the numbers in a different way, that's why that's the number one option, because you can go to any kid in the state and you can still say that you're going to go play at Oregon, you're going to go play at USC and things of that nature. I know you mentioned the Arizona schools. You stole my thunder on that. But again, to just add a little bit to that, pretty much every top quarterback prospect over the last couple of years has come out of that Phoenix area as well. They produce a lot of talent. So that's why that's so important. But really also with name, image, likeness. I mean, you truly open the door to different markets where a young man could come from the West or vice versa. And the Pac-12 signs a lot of Texas kids already. USC has a ton of Texas and Texas Tech influence, on their coaching staff today. So yeah, again, that's the no-brainer. Just wanted to start there. The second one, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I mean, you mentioned USC, Oregon too. I feel like they sign 5 Texas kids a year. And then I was just looking at the future football schedule. Tech has games at Oregon State, both of those already. They have games at Fresno State, which isn't Pac-12, but it is in California. And then they also have games at Colorado State, again, not Pac-12, but Colorado is, and Wyoming, which isn't Pac-12, but isn't, that region of the country. So a lot of, future, non-conference games too in those states.
Sure.
That could help with recruiting.
And I guess, just taking a quick step back from recruiting, all that sounds great, right? The playing at Oregon, the playing at USC, the going to Colorado again, all that sounds tremendous, right? And even the Colorado portion is nostalgic. The Arizona State conversation, people love those campuses. Those are recent non-cons. But I mean, overall, think 20 years, 30 years later, is that still as powerful, you think? Is that, I mean, those conferences have lasted a long time. But as we look at this, if they add 2, that's 14. If the idea is we're all going to 16, then, I don't know, is the option to add Baylor and TCU, I guess we've always heard they don't want private institutions or religious institutions, but is that, is adding what is their other option, Ben, right? Like what other schools are out there that they could add or that they could affiliate with? That becomes the question. And I guess that's a big if game, that we could play. But, I think of like a now best option versus like 20, look, the Big 12's 25 years old, right? I mean, you kind of look at that, and then people that were around at that time, that was a misfit toy situation as well, right? And so that came together and it grew into what it is today. Yes, you had OU in Texas, no doubt. Nobody's arguing that. I think that would be a fool's errand. But that's what I wanted to talk about next in that reimagined Big 12 and identifying some of these schools and trying to think ahead at, maybe what would be next. And so, yes, would it suck? Yes, would you make less money? Would you have to kind of prove yourself? All of those things. But I think in, all these changes I mentioned in this new college football world, I'm just going to reiterate it again. If you do not get the Pac-12, again, obvious answer. I truly think this is a good option for Texas Tech. If you look at maybe a long-term opportunity for them to truly, reshuffle the deck and try to be a conference leader across the board. We're not just talking football, but whatever the future of college football is, you want to be at the top of that conference. People can talk about, whether you have the opportunity to be in the championship game or not. I mean, since he finished number 8 in the country, UCF finished whatever they did the year before. I mean, those are media darlings. Those are out there. If the idea is to make money and build the brand and do all these things, it seems as though that's a viable option. Whether people necessarily like that or not. And I guess tying it back to recruiting, it seems like you're not competing with OU, Texas, Alabama, LSU, these bigger schools. You're not really competing with them for recruits. You're competing with, we always say, win against Oklahoma State, win against TCU, win against Baylor. When that's kind of a mark for success, but you're starting to compete more with the SMUs, the Houstons, and other regional programs, right? You win most of those battles, but with the right group of coaches, targets, et cetera. I mean, some of these schools like SMU are landing rivals 254 stars. Now, sure, they have to sign them, but historically, I mean, since I've been doing this, Tech signs 1, maybe 2 4-stars a class, and I know it's not all about the rankings per se, but I don't know. I would say all of that word salad to say I don't know if recruiting changes much from what it is today in that reimagined conference, simply because of the transfer portal, which we could talk about for another 30 minutes. But I don't know your thoughts on maybe that best case scenario versus what I just described.
Yeah, I think, the Frankenstein Big 12 as it is, adding a few teams. I forgot which outlet reported it, whether it was ESPN or CBS or Stadium, one of those, but they said, even once OU and Texas leave, the Big 12 is still considered a power conference. They still get the, all that comes with that as far as college football playoff and all that. So I think that would be, the second best option. If you don't get the Pac-12, I'm with you. Instead of going to the American or something like that, in a demolished Big 12. But all that is to say is, I mean, I agree with you. You mentioned SMU as one of those programs in the group of 5 that's landing some big time recruits, and like you said, that just comes down to having the right coaches and the game plan and all that. But as I mentioned before, the most important thing is for Tech to stay in a Power 5 conference. That'll help you win some of those battles. And as far as who I'd like to see, I mean, you mentioned Cincinnati, UCF. I mean, those aren't necessarily close. Could be some interesting road trips there. But I mean, that's anyone's guess, whether that's, obviously for Tech, they don't want SMU, they don't want Houston, Tulsa. I don't think they want any other regional programs, getting to compete for the same recruits, at the same level.
Yeah, the more and more I think about it, recruiting is cyclical as well, right? I mean, at one point Miami was getting whoever they wanted and, winning national titles, and today, they do well, but, the on-field success isn't there. So, I remember thinking they were the best ever when I was a kid, and, you grow up and things change in college football is the point, but take away the SEC, take away the Big 12, take away the Pac, just looking at college football, I think, I heard it kind of best on another podcast where they talked about it's really all about the matchups. Because if you really sit here and you want to read about ESPN, you want to read about Fox, you want to talk about bylaws and media rights and all these things, what really matters is the money. And it matters, how many folks are going to tune in and absolutely watch that game so they can sell more ad dollars and make more money, right? So ultimately, when you look at the SEC week in and week out, we would be liars if, we said that. I mean, look at like a school, and this is not a knock, but, everybody points at Vandy, Kentucky, Mississippi State, I don't know, South Carolina, others. They basically hit the lottery by being in the SEC, Arkansas, right? I mean, they made a great decision there, and they're going to make upwards of, I think I saw 60, 70 million a year. It's nuts, right? So if you hit that geographic lottery in your Texas Tech, absolutely you would do that. But I don't know. I forget where I was going with that, but week in and week out, you see the best matchups, right? It's stuff that people will gravitate towards because I don't know about you, but I'm a cord cutter and have been for 3 or 4 years. They just show you the games on there, right? And you're going to click. And the average person, if they're not looking for a Tech game or a specific game, what are they going to click on, right? Are they going to click on LSU, Texas? Are they going to click on Alabama and OU? I mean, come on. I know that's what I'm clicking on. So again, kudos to them. It kind of leaves us with a bunch of question marks and maybe what I said, before, a bunch of ifs. But one thing is for certain. I would lean closer to the Tech brand remaining strong, right? That stadium behind you, the facilities behind me, all that exists. The bill or the grant of rights, this agreement, all this stuff, it just doesn't go away tomorrow. I think they're going to have time to do these things. It was interesting to me. I sat through that Senate thing as long as I could, man, and I just had to turn it off. But the interesting thing was he said they got in touch with them in the spring. So then what that narrative becomes is, okay, well then anything Tech and or, the Big 12 does, it'll take from now until, maybe later in the fall. And then you throw the season in there, and does that still happen with all the roles and responsibilities they have, in season? And so, man, just fascinating. Like we talked about, you can take it in a number of different directions. But Ben, any last thoughts or subjects you wanted to bring up when it comes to how realignment is kind of dropping a bomb here before the season?
Yeah, I also watched the Senate thing. I think I watched all 6.5 hours, however long it was. It was
No
great
way,
for
man.
me because it killed most of my workday, actually. So that was nice. But no, I think, we always focus on the football aspect, but one of the senators made the comment about, March Madness, and if there's a super conference that breaks off from the NCAA, is that good for the sport? I hope that the super conference stuff doesn't happen because, that was a great point. You like seeing Texas lose to Abilene Christian and, in the first round of the NCAA tournament, not taking a shot at Texas, but you like to see those huge upsets. And if
Oh, they were taking shots.
they were, it was great to see. But no, if 30 or however many teams just leave the NCAA, it's a completely different sport. I just hope it doesn't happen, but it seems like that's the way it's trending. At least, that's what people are thinking, eventually is going to happen, which, I'm not a fan of.
What's crazy about that is I'm not smart enough to kind of maybe articulate it the way I'm thinking about it here. But what's crazy about that, I just said take the logos off of it, and essentially they're paying these 16 teams $70+ million per year, right, to be in this football league. And then on top of that, they schedule their non-cons, they sell their tier 3 rights, etc. So they're going to make mountains of money. And I know that that's important, and I know you have to try to negotiate and get the most that you can. But I heard someone say that ultimately, you look at the number 16 and you look at that NFL model, and you're almost getting to like this semi-pro league, right? Which, let's face it, the SEC produce a lot of NFL players, but you really get away from what college football is, and it's regional rivalries, and it's grabbing a coffee and saying, "Hey, suck it, Golan, we whooped your ass on Saturday," right? I mean, you're not going to get that with some of your coworkers in whatever conference kind of shakes out. And to me, that would be kind of the only downside of the Pac-12. I don't know how to talk crap to a I don't know, Oregon State fan, right? USC fan. I mean, how do they view Texas Tech? I mean, all of that'll take care of itself. But again, I think it'd be cool to be able to hop in the car and continue to drive to games around Texas and see, how a conference with that brand and that model could sustain success over a large amount of time. But again, that's just me, and there's so much more of that to talk about over time. But anything else, Ben?
Yeah, I just think either way, change is coming. It sucks right now not knowing what's going to happen, but once something happens, it'll be exciting and new and fun, and we can, discuss it all then. But I mean, that's all from me.
Yeah, certainly more to come on conference realignment. It's entirely too early to see how that impacts recruitment, whatsoever, like we said, but we'll stay on that. There's Texas Tech football local media day tomorrow, and our colleagues will be there. So a ton of information, should come out of that event. And then, we talked about, Ben, maybe sinking our teeth into name, image, and likeness, just to see now after a month or so, how it's impacted Texas Tech athletes, as well as just kind of taking a look at nationally, things that have piqued our interest. But with that being said, thanks again to Carnley Properties. We'll post their information here below. But for Ben Golan, I'm Matt Clare, and this has been the Lubbock or Leave It podcast. Thanks for tuning in.